And it looks like it's 1 o'clock, and I know Mr. Alexander's not going to be here, and we have Mr. Roberts on the telephone.
It's July the 18th. This is the meeting of the Laws and Rules Committee for the Tennessee State Accountancy Board. Today we have, I think we're going to have two issues that we're going to look at. One is kind of decide what we might be able to do for a penalty for not completing our CPEs for ethics. I think these have been in, if I understand correctly, these have been in place somewhere in the 2007 year, so they've been around a while. They're on the website, so you know we've had a little track record of those that either just did not read the website, just did not keep up with you know, it's that you need to have those CPEs now. And I think at this point, if they're not completed, a letter goes out, and you have 30 days to complete the CPEs for ethics. And I guess what we're looking at, being that this has been out for 6 years at least now, and I think at that point, if you complete your CPEs, you know, you're done with your compliance at that point.
Right. Now,
is it an option? Should there be a penalty of some type beyond that? Because we all know you have to have so many hours. I mean, it should be a kind of a standard theme now that you have to have. You have to have 80 hours, and you have to have CPEs for ethics now. So beyond just you have a month, complete the 2 hours. Is there anything else you think that we might be able to? Is there a penalty that should be involved with that, or do you think that's a standard procedure? I guess as the first item. But for opinion, or thoughts on that.
If you look at rule, Jennifer, do you have your law book? Troy, do you have yours? 0020-05-.06. It's on page 64. And at the bottom where it says failure to meet CPE requirements. That second penalty says a penalty of 8 additional CPE hours will be assessed against those license holders who fail to meet the 80-hour 2-year minimum required by rule ... unless an extension of time is granted by the board. We can interpret that loosely to give an 8-hour penalty for failing to meet the CPE requirements, but when someone comes back and says, I've got 80 hours,
right,
I just don't have my ethics CPE, do we want to try to use this to penalize, or do we want to create a new section here for not complying with the ethics requirement? I think that's the basic question.
Right. I would tend to think, just my thought, that is in the rule that either if you have 80 hours, you haven't completed your CPE ethics, that either you should have more than 2 hours of CPE to complete, instead of just completing the 2 hours and then you're free and clear. You should either have to do you may have some other CPEs to do besides those 2 hours. In my opinion, there should be some type of additional work involved.
Just to make sure I understand, right now that 30-day, that letter in the 30-day, is that kind of like a grace period? Like if you say you've got the 30 days to get the 2 hours of ethics, and then nothing more is going to happen to you? Is that?
That's basically the way the CPE audits are working now. As long as you get it, we call you compliant late with ethics, is how we're classifying those.
I got a quick question, Mark. This may be for you. The way I read that rule you just cited, dash .08, it says that you get assessed the CPE if you fail to meet the 80-hour 2-year minimum in dash .03. So I go to .03, and it looks like you are required to receive, tell me if I'm reading this incorrectly, you're required to receive or earn 20 hours in each of the 2 years with the following specifications. And the second one, B, is that all license holders shall complete board-approved 2-hour state-specific ethics course. So aren't we already requiring them to complete that, and if they don't, they already get assessed the 8-hour penalty as it's written now?
We have not been assessing the 8-hour penalty because of the way the rule is written. It says if you get the 80 hours, if you don't get 80 hours, then we'll assess the penalty. But we've had some licensees who have completed 80 hours and just not had the ethics.
Right,
so it's a matter of...
So I guess my question is how you interpret the rule, because the way I read the rule, it says that he or she has completed no less than 80 hours of qualified continuing professional education during the 2-year period immediately preceding renewal, with a minimum of 20 hours in each year with specifications as follows. And then it lists A through E as specifications. So maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but the way I read that is that you have to meet A through E in addition to getting 20 years at least in each of the 2 years. In other words, you can't wait till the last year to get 80 is the way I read that. It's what they're trying to do.
That's correct.
Right.
The way I'm reading it, it seems to me like we already are requiring it so that we could go ahead and assess if we needed to.
Yeah, that was the other, after when I read that, that's the other way, if there's maybe a way to interpret the rule, or I don't know if you want to change the rule to where it just, your CPE ethics fall into the same 8 hours, however you may word that, instead of having extra. If you don't complete your 2 CPE hours, you have additional penalties. We could somehow make sure this rule states, the 8 hours also applies regardless whether you have 80 hours, but you don't have your ethics.
Yeah, or we could just clarify. One option also could be just clarifying the way that the language in -.031 is at the end reads, to just clarify that in your 2 years you're required to, at the minimum, get the following. And if you included, your CPE there, then failure to meet these requirements in .03 would then trigger the 8-hour penalty. We wouldn't have to add something. So I guess it's an alternative. We could just clarify this rule rather than adding an affirmative rule, I guess. Or we could add an affirmative rule. It just would be potentially confusing, I would think, if we didn't touch this rule at all, .03, and just added something new.
Yes, I'm a little confused as to what, are you looking for an option so that you don't have to, when people have already got they've already gotten their 80 hours, but they just didn't get the 2 hours of state-specific ethics, you're trying to say not have to assess them the 8 hour? Are you looking for an option that's written where if they've already got their 8 hours but they missed the 2, you're trying to...
No,
I'm asking Mark. Sorry, what he...
Sorry.
No, I was asking Mark what the point of having another option would be. That's...
The point is, we want some clarification on what to do with these people that have done 80 hours but have not gotten their 2 hours of state-specific ethics. What we have been doing is simply allowing them to complete the state-specific ethics, and then that's it. There's no penalty involved. Should we be assessing a penalty based on this rule, or should we create a new rule specifically for not complying with this portion of the requirement? That's our question.
But you don't have a recommendation on that?
Not at this time, no.
Okay.
I'm seeking the committee's opinion.
My opinion would be either to clarify the rule to where it's clear that, even if you have done your 80 hours of CPE, but you did not do your 2 hours of state-specific, that it fall somewhere in the umbrella of the added 8 hours. Would that be easy? It would be easier to clarify it than I think it would be to add a rule or any other maybe procedure. Would that be a correct statement?
That would be my preference. Again, the way I read the rule, the way it's written, to me says that you're required to get, within your 80 hours in 2 years, you're required to get 2 state-specific CPE, and if you don't do it, then you can be assessed a penalty of 8 hours CPE. That's how I read that rule currently. So if there's a difference of opinion, I would think the better approach would be just to clarify the way this rule is written so that it's clear. That's just my opinion.
I agree with that. So, I mean,
Okay. Jennifer?
Well, I'm fine with that. If you're wanting just to do what you already currently are allowed to do, then just make it clear. I thought maybe you were trying to do something different, or come up. Then yeah, clarifying is obviously the easiest and clearest way to go.
All right, so we'll work on some language for that.
Yeah, and so do we need to, I guess Mark or Troy, do we need to discuss do we need to throw out some ideas on how we would clarify
Sure.
or not?
should.
I didn't know if that's something we typically would just let Mark and his staff do, and then we would come. I just don't know the way the protocol is.
It can work either way, Gabe. If you have some ideas on how to clarify, then certainly would entertain those thoughts.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything specific. I just didn't know if we needed to spend some time trying to go through that right now before we moved on to the next topic. If you give me a minute, I'll be happy to read this and give you my initial thought.
Try to think of some way to. I mean, I'm reading the rule as it stands. Penalty of 8 additional.
I mean, there's a couple ways I guess you could do it conceptually. You could say that you are required to have 80 hours in the 2-year period, and then kind of stop the first section of 1 there with something like, and in addition, you must meet the following requirements within the same period. So the first could be a minimum of 20 hours in each year, so that we're not letting people wait until the last month of the 2-year period and get all 80 hours. And then you could have A, B, B, and B, B, C, et cetera, so that the point is you got to have 80 as kind of the bar, and then within that time period you got to do the following things. And one of those things would be you have to get 2 hours of state-specific CTE.
Okay, I think I've got that.
I mean, that's just one option. I guess there's several different things you could do. Jennifer may be better at wordsmithing that than I would be.
Mark, is that a start on that as far as the wording goes, or do?
Yes, we can work on that.
Okay, we'll do that.
Mr. Chairman, I hope this is working and everybody can hear me. Another potential option, just for consideration, on page 64, 05-.08, already, that's a section that seems to really be separate and set apart for describing the penalties for what happens if you don't meet the CPE requirements. I would posit that it may be easier to just plug in a sub 3 there that says a penalty of 8 hours for not meeting the ethics requirement in whatever section sub B that is, and then convert number 3 existing into number 4, and then anybody who wants to know, all right, where's the list of things that are going to get you a penalty of 8 hours if you don't do them for CPE purposes, and they can find them all right here in this rule.
Well, when I looked at that, I thought, well, is there a way to add to item 2 under that rule, or just add another?
You might be able to. That one of adding a 3 is an option, or you might be able to just add some language in 2 to clarify that the 80-hour requirement includes the 2 hours state-specific.
Yeah, I think that's a great option. I would just again mention that it took me like 5 times to read -.03.1, and so it might be worth at least 1 or 2 clarifications just so it is clear, so that we have it covered on both sides. I know that would require changing 2 different rules, but that's just, I think Chris's suggestion is well taken, but it might be worth also revisiting the original, lack of clarity in this other rule, potentially.
I like that idea. It's shorter. It's straightforward and clear. So it's.
And as Gabe said, it could go either way. You could just put 2 commas and something in sub 2 of .08 saying 80-hour 2-year minimum, comma, which shall include timely completion of the 2-hour state-specific ethics, comma, and then finish the rest of it, and you're done. or plug in number 3 if you think it needs to be separate and standalone. I think either way would be fine. It just depends on the committee and the full board's ultimate will with regard to this change.
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, I think that Chris's original suggestion of adding 3 to .08 and then renumbering 3 as 4, the current 3 as 4, is a good idea. I think if you look at the way number 2 under .08 is written, I think that the second suggestion I was making is going back to the rule that's referenced there, which is 0020-05-.03, and look at subset 1, and perhaps clarify that, maybe even add an and between in each year and then with specifications as follows, so that it's clear when you look at the CPE requirement rule, after you've been referenced to what happens if you don't comply with the CPE requirements, you then go to the CPE requirement rule, and it's clear that within the 80 hours, you also have to do 2 state-specific hours. That was my suggestion.
Okay.
That seems doable. It shouldn't be too difficult to plug in something of that for .03 sub 1 right there at the top, just to make clear that that includes the 2 hours, even though it's separately set forth in sub B a couple of paragraphs later. If we're just trying to do clarity here, then that's fine as well. Could work either way, and whatever the committee and the board wants, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, and just so on that point, to follow up, Chris, what I would even say is it could be as simple as saying in the current one, at the end, we could say something. It says with a minimum of 20 hours in each year, with specifications as follows. So what you could do is say with a minimum of 20 hours in each year and with specifications as follows. And to me, that clarifies a little bit that we're saying that in addition to requiring 20 of the 80 being earned in both years, you also have to meet the following list of A through E, one of which includes earning 2 state-specific courses in CPE, in ethics.
I like that, actually. Probably the best of what we've said so far. Do the separate 3 under .08 and just add an and under sub 1 of .03. I mean, I think that really does cover it in both directions.
That's fine. The only question I'm contemplating is, if I understand what they're saying, is then is it going to be confusing of whether you have to get the 2 hours and your 20 in each year, or are you going to have 2 hours for each year?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Well, I'm sorry, Gabe. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
I think adding the and in sub 1 in the place that we were talking about adding it, you see, the with a minimum of 20 hours each year, even though there's no commas or parentheses around it, it's kind of a separate thought, but you divide that up with an and with the specifications as follows. Well, I mean, that kind of says, okay, like you were referring to earlier, A through E all fall under this, and so long as sub B is clear that it's just the 2 hours.
I mean, we also, to address Jennifer's point, which I think is well taken, we could just stop it at, you could say something to the effect of continuing professional education during the 2-year period immediately preceding renewal, and then do something like, in accordance with the following specifications. And then you renumber the current A through E, B through F, and then you add as an A a minimum of 20 hours in each year, or each of the 2 years, something like that. I don't know, Jennifer, if you think that addresses your potential confusion, concern, or not.
It sounds fine. I mean, maybe when you put it all together and we can read it kind of all in one picture.
I think we can get it to worded to where it's understood by the rule that when and where and how many of the 2 hours.
Could also add language in B that clarifies that you could keep adding language to clarify
Right.
everything.
You
if
could.
needed, but
Is that acceptable? as far as the changes go?
Yes, we have things to work with now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Oh, no. Our other item that we may discuss would be I think this was brought up in our May meeting. This is a penalty for failing to pay the professional privilege tax. And I think at this point we've had instances we would have someone that they may go 2 years without paying the tax, and then it gets to our department, and we may start an investigation, and then at that point they decide to pay their tax, and then that kind of stops everything. But as our department goes, we have hours, we have paperwork to do, and from what I understand, you still have to complete the investigation in some way at some point. At this point, I did talk to the Tennessee Department of Revenue a couple times, and of course I just kind of want to explain their procedures and how long it took, and I did learn some things that it takes two years to get on the list if you don't pay the tax. So by the time it gets to us, it's going to be at least 2.5. Y'all let me know. It should be at least 2.5 years old from the original. And so what happens by the time it gets to us, we just waste. I think from what I understood, there's no penalty if they pay their tax. If there's anything else involved, and then that stops it. And then we've spent hours or man hours and other time to start the investigation. So I think there was something brought up. Should there be a penalty added if the investigation is started, even though they pay the tax? They may be 2 years old, it may be 2.5 years old. Even though they pay the tax that's owed, if we have started an investigation, should there be a penalty added at that point, regardless of whether they pay what's due? I mean, if investigation has begun of any kind, should there be a penalty involved at that?
Mark, do you have a citation for the statute related to the professional privilege tax? Andy?
There are actually 2 citations, but let me give you the one of the rule. That is Rule 0020-4-.03 2E that talks about willfully failing to file a report or record required by state or federal law.
I'm sorry, that was -4 what?
It's on page 57, Gabe.
Thank you.
Point number E there, second one down.
Yeah, gotcha.
We have been reporting it as a discreditable act.
Okay. And then Title 62 is where the statute is?
Gabe, I think the professional privilege tax statute may be under Title 67. I want to say, and this is just top of my head because I don't have my statute book with me, but
yeah, that's right. You're right.
Be 67-4, maybe 1701 thereabouts.
Yeah, you're right.
And so
that's impressive, Chris.
I've just don't give me too much credit. I've just worked with this so much it seems to have stuck in my brain somehow.
Yeah, I mean you're right. For the benefit of the committee, he doesn't have a code book in front of him. Chris was right on. 1701.
And while you guys are looking at the statute, let me kind of, if we hadn't covered it before, if we have, feel free to stop me, but kind of the issue that we're having with an eye towards disciplinary proceedings, and having spoken with our litigator, Jesse Joseph, about this, he would echo where we are. Classifying failure to pay professional privilege tax as a discreditable act is, to be charitable, a stretch anyway. And where we are now, it really is a crapshoot as to whether we can even go forward on formal hearings or not, because we have to essentially file the case with APD, get a docket number, get it scheduled, do all the rigmarole to get everybody here, and then it just depends on which ALJ we get. And if the ALJ decides to disallow the interpretation of discreditable act to include failure to pay privilege tax on time, then at least in theory, this board is without authority to move forward, because this board derives its authority from Title 62 and the Accountancy Act, not necessarily Title 67, which are the taxing statutes. So at that point, if the judge says no, then we could be back to square one, or possibly even worse, at the point of, okay, well, you should really go pay that now. That would be really awesome if you did. Thank you. But if they do let us go forward under discreditable acts, that's fine. But what would be much cleaner and clearer, if it's the committee and the board's will, and that's completely up to you guys and gals, is a separate rule which sets forth failure to timely pay privilege tax as a disciplinary violation under the Accountancy Board statutes. And if that were going to be the case, then I have a suggestion as to where maybe we could put it. But and I would also maybe word it a little more broadly and generally, so that we would not necessarily be limited by the 2-year plus limitation that revenue is hamstrung by. So I can explain further if need be, but that's kind of where we are now.
Okay, at this point, say, if the bill, say for that tax, goes out on the first day of June, and then you're going to go, you may get a list of some type at the end of January. I mean, and I think I talked to Mark, it's kind of like the ideal way of, but just say, for example, this would, and we're getting to your rule, say it, went out in June, we get a list at the end of January of those that hadn't paid. I think just you're going to note that goes out, this needs to be paid by so many days, and then I think there'll probably be a second request maybe go out, and then somewhere in May you may be getting to the point where somebody hasn't paid their June bill, they've had their 2 letters, you've had the list, they've had their 2 letters, they still haven't paid. Would that be at that point where that additional rule that you're talking about, would that be where you would want that particular time frame? Is that where it would be applied, or is there another, is there another time frame that
that's a good question.
Is better or worse, or
No, I mean that's the board and the staff, whatever time frame and allowances they would like to allow for attempts at compliance subsequent to receiving that list, it is fine with me. But I think there's a way to do a rule if we're going to do one that would kind of, again, cover it broadly and generally. So, the board could, on a case-by-case basis, if they so chose, maybe give folks that time to try to get it right. But once you have to pull the trigger and file a complaint, you want the best possible language you have to go forward. And I would say, just off the top of my head, page 56 in the Law and Rules book, you're under .03, grounds for discipline against licensees, subsection C. I just go down under number 8, create a new sub 9, and just very simply, failure to timely pay professional privilege tax as required by law, period. So that way, when it comes complaint time, and there are other programs, regulatory programs, by the way, that have PPT-specific rules that make it easier for them to work under, so we're not treading new ground here. But with that, whenever the time for allowances and grace periods, whatever that may be, is over, and you go forward, you got that rule in there, then you don't have to try and fit the square peg of PPT non-payment into the round hole of discreditable acts or this willfully failing to file a report. I mean, it's not impossible, but I think it would take a lot of the ambiguity and uncertainty out from not only a complaint perspective, but also a litigation and formal hearing perspective down the road.
Or be able to be handled by our department. I kind of take a little other issues off. Okay.
Chris, I got one quick question, kind of, I guess it's related. Do you have the citation where in the statute the board is authorized to promulgate rules? Like where our rulemaking authority comes from is what I'm asking about. You had mentioned there's a difference. Ours comes under 62, whereas the professional privilege tax is in the revenue statute.
Gabe, I'm going to have to just kind of scan through and look for that, so just bear with me.
I am too, so I was just didn't know if you had it handy.
Okay. I've got it. It's on page 7, 62.1.105. You're going to subsection E. The board may adopt rules governing its administration and enforcement of this chapter and the conduct of licensees, including but not limited to. Then you're looking down at sub 4, rules of professional conduct, controlling quality and probity of services. And then sub 3, education, experience, qualifications. And then number 9, which is a great catch-all, and I'm glad it's in there, other rules that the board may deem necessary or appropriate for implementing the provisions and purposes of this chapter. Yeah. So I think there's your authority to not only promulgate rules, but also promulgate rules that may not be specifically mentioned in those subsections above number 9.
At this point, we're saying it would be, as far as this topic, it would be preferable. I'm just kind of talking out loud. So we add a rule. At this point, we just need to discuss maybe when. But if it's broad, the time frame is not as important. There's no set time. If it's a broad rule, then you can. But is this? I like this a lot better. It cuts down some of the time.
It'll certainly make it easier for the staff.
Well, yeah, it will. That's what I mean. It cuts down a lot of the time, the staff, and you can kind of take care of things yourself. I mean, I like that idea, and I do depend on you for a lot of the way the rules are written and read.
Don't sell yourself short, Mr. Brewer. You did some great work on the clarification of inactive status stuff that we're going to be looking at tomorrow, and that was really appreciated. We'd been wrestling with that for a while, and some of what you brought to the table was kind of what we hadn't seen before and felt like it was kind of a breakthrough, so we appreciate that.
Hey, Chris, can I ask a follow-up question? Is there a section in the Accountancy Act that talks about the professional privilege tax?
Not to my knowledge. I've not seen one. The only thing that I could even, and it doesn't, again, specify it exactly, but in the 62.1.105, and you're talking about number 8, it's just rule setting fees, and then down to the end, and other necessary fees. Again, stretching, but, you know, professional privilege tax is a fee that you have to pay to the state as a condition of continuing to practice your profession. You know, whether that's a good thing or not is something to be decided by the legislature. But to your question, I don't see anything specifically in the Accountancy Act that references PPT.
What does the committee wish to add that?
Here's my question. I think it's a good idea, generally speaking, to add this. I understand the frustration and the expense the state has to endure to start investigations only for them to be thwarted later because they're paid. My concern, I'm not trying to over-lawyer this at all, but my concern is, do we actually have the authority to issue a rule related to the payment of a professional privilege tax when that authority is in the revenue statute in Title 67, I guess 4? That's my only concern. So if we passed it and somebody failed to pay for whatever reason, and then we brought action against them based on our new rule, if they challenged the applicability of that rule, would it be upheld or not? I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way that it would be. I mean, I think the conversation about fees is instructive, but the question is a tax a fee or not? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
I mean, this clearly contemplates other types of fees, I think.
Well, I would tend to, for the most part, agree with you, Gabe. One thing I would just point out that part of the rulemaking process, once the rulemaking hearing itself has been held, the next step is for those rules to go to the AG's office for review for legality, and that's before it even gets to the GovOps committee for their review. So if the Attorney General's office has a pressing or severe problem with with that, or says, hey, look, because one of the things you have to do on the rulemaking forms is you have to cite to the statute or statutes from which you are claiming the authority to do what the rule professes to do is or are derived. And so those would have to be cited there. And so my thought would be the AG's review would say, okay, either the statutes you're citing do provide this authority or they don't. And if they don't, then I feel pretty confident they would come back to us and say, we just don't think you have the authority. And then if they said that, then that would be the end of that particular attempted rule. And even beyond the AG's office, if the GovOps committee doesn't like it or thinks it doesn't apply or thinks it's not a good idea that it should apply, then that's another level of review that is sort of quasi-legal in nature anyway, that would take place before this rule came into effect.
Yeah, so I totally hear you. So reading E says the board may adopt rules governing its administration and enforcement of this chapter and the conduct of licensees, including but not limited to. So I guess if we phrase the rule based on their conduct, accountant's conduct, whether or not they paid, I guess that would make it perhaps more amenable in terms of whether the AG, when they pass on it or not.
Well, the citation itself would just be to 62.1.105 generally, and if the AG's office comes back and says, okay, as part of our review, please tell us which section or sections of the statute you believe, and then I would point to those, and then they would either thumbs up or thumbs down it, and we'd have our answer.
Right, with the focus being on the actual conduct of the licensees and the actual payment, right, of the professional privilege tax.
Right, because when you phrase it in terms of conduct, that is a fact-based inquiry that is either yes or no, it did happen or it didn't, and that's I think that's a much easier sell, for lack of a better word, than again trying to shoehorn things where maybe they don't go, which is what has somehow and somewhat been taking place up till now.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you.
As a committee, we would like to add that particular wording and rule.
Okay, what we'll do then, Troy, is we will draft language, and it'll be probably something as simple as Chris stated, failure to pay, that, and bring that back to you at the next meeting.
That's fine.
For you to vote on.
Sure.
Okay.
Topics.
Or 2 topics. That's it.
Our committee meeting is adjourned.
CCH has requested approval to present Tennessee State Ethics. And so Karen emailed out their presentation, and actually you have a copy before you today, a hard copy, about the ethics. Wanting to present. I don't know. I had Karen I'll pass this out. We did this back in 2007. I think this is what Dr. Riggs used when she would review to kind of look at the different pieces of information. You can tell me if that's right, Karen, but I think this is what Kathy used, or okay, in reviewing these courses that when they're submitted. I did not have that at the time when I was reviewing this course from CCH. But I did flip through it, and it looked comprehensive to me, from a layperson's
Very comprehensive.
I did. I waited, and it felt heavy too. So it's got to be dense.
A little intimidating.
Yeah. No, it seemed to model on what I reviewed. It seemed to go through all the topics about, the board and licensing requirements and our various rules. That's what we're hoping. Let's see, when I looked at the rule about this, it's, I think on page 60 of our rule book, it just says, if this is the right one, yeah. But it's all license holders shall complete a board-approved 2-hour state-specific ethics course designed to familiarize the licensee with accountancy law and rules, as well as professional ethics. Mark, do you look at these when they come in, or do you?
I look at most of them. And if I remember the CCH one, it was very comprehensive. I don't have a copy of that one in front of me, but I remember looking at it.
A section on the license renewal based on the new law change that was back in 2007.
It does include a section on license renewal. Yeah. They all do.
Chairman, we've got 3 of these coming up before the committee today. Can we consider all these at one time? Vote on them at one time?
Fine with me, yes. So we'll look at the CCH one, and then Dennis Dicus, which is the next hard copy that you were handed out today. It's a PowerPoint. And then the last, why don't we consider, Stephen wants to.
I need to abstain from discussion with Dennis Dicus, is what our firm has a relationship with him. So I'd prefer to at least take that one separate so I can abstain from that.
No problem.
You could do the other 2 together if you want.
Or just to put them all on the table, the third one is for, it was a course by Accounting Tools. And so we're reviewing all 3 of these course materials that we have in hard copy before us, for the same standards based on that outline that I handed out to you that has been used in the past, and based on the standard of the rule. I think Karen told me that on the accounting tools portion, it was a 150 some odd page document, and when I looked at it online, when we got to part 3, which was the Tennessee ethics, it listed out all of our rules just verbatim, and then it went into these questions. And so Karen has just copied out the questions, didn't print out for us the whole course, just the applicable part that we need to review. And she didn't copy for us our rules again, because we have them in our rule book. Has everybody had a chance to look at least the CCH program? Thoughts on this one? I'll throw out there. I thought that the course looked like what we've approved in the past and looked comprehensive and thorough. So I would recommend approving this course for state-specific ethics. I'm just talking about the CCH one right now.
I have had a CCH, CPE in my office, actually a book, and it was extensive, and it was a good CPE, the one that I've seen for CCA.
I agree with you. This looks very comprehensive and pretty much covers everything, I believe, that's in we have in our guidelines.
Separately. Do I need a motion?
You've already made the motion. You
I made
need
the
a
motion.
second.
Sorry, I made
I'll
the motion.
second the motion that she made.
Thank you. Getting lost among procedure here. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Everybody's unanimous on that one. We'll go ahead and skip ahead to the accounting tools and take that one up since Stephen can participate in this discussion. When I was reviewing this course, was a little, I guess I had some pause because I'm not sure that I've seen a course like this before where it just lays out all of the rules and then has a bunch of questions. And then in looking at the questions, and I didn't read every single question, I must admit, but it doesn't seem to go through, just comprehensively even all of the rules. This did not seem like a typical course that we've approved in the past, and I was concerned about its comprehensive nature and being thorough enough. I don't know in the past if, we've had these and worked with people to try to beef up the way they lay out their courses, and I wasn't sure. I guess is this a self-study course?
Yes.
So I didn't know if that changed anything. So I'm looking for a little guidance, I guess.
My thoughts were there wasn't enough information really to determine if it covers all the necessary areas that we lay out for the based on this content specific outline that we have followed in the past. It's basically just some sample questions.
Well, basically all this one is a reiteration of the rules. I mean, that's all it is. It's taking the rule book and putting it in written format and asking you some questions about it. That's all there is to it.
Like this class, basically you're supposed to read the rules and then answer these questions.
Well, there is a lot more to it than than this.
Yes, the
The
rules are included.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
I guess what my question was, a lot of these, when you see that way, they actually provide a summary of they'll give you the rule and you can read the technical rule, but then they'll provide a paragraph or two kind of putting it in practical terms, explaining a little bit more. I wasn't sure if we wanted to go back with that kind of suggestion that they provide a little more, I guess, user-friendliness.
Okay, that's quick. Mark, are you talking about the same thing? We're talking about this book? Yeah. I just, what was that, 60, 70 pages long, something like that? I printed off just the first 8 or 9 pages, 10 pages of it, and I would just, in the beginning part of it, it seems like they're focusing on attitudes towards ethics. They're getting into ethical reasoning for accountants, things like that. Is that part of what your review included?
Ours was the total course, Karen. Do you remember? It's a 4-hour, yeah, that's my recollection. It's a 4-hour course, Henry, but the last portion of it, the last 2 hours, is what you all are being asked to approve, is the Tennessee-specific ethics. The first part is simply general ethics, and it goes into the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct, is where it goes there. Chapter 3 in this one is the Tennessee ethics, and that's simply the reiteration of the rules. I'm sorry if that wasn't made clear.
Just 6 pages of questions, the rules and 6 pages of questions on Tennessee.
Well, you're being asked to approve. And to my knowledge, the board has not approved a course that was simply the rules with some questions added to it.
I was concerned about the standard that sets. I mean, basically, that's not much of a standard.
It's like it's just a little subsection that we're going to approve that's going to satisfy our ethics requirement. At least that's my interpretation of it.
It's my understanding that they're provided with a copy. Are they provided with a copy of this outline when they apply, or?
Yes. They are generally given a copy of the outline when they indicate they want to provide us with a course. I think this one just came in unsolicited, did it not? Yeah. They didn't ask for any guidance.
Today, and I can be persuaded, but I'm inclined to want to go back to them and provide them with a copy of this outline and explain that this needs to be beefed up a little bit.
I agree.
Try to help guide them if we can.
I'm not comfortable with the way it's presented here. I'm just not comfortable. I'm not saying it's wrong, but giving an approval for it at this time. Make a motion that we send accounting tools notification and include a copy of the content-specific outline and ask them to represent their ethics proposal if they wish to do so.
I'll second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I will take up the course for Dennis Dykus, and Stephen will abstain from discussion voting.
Just had a run-in with Dennis Dykus over the years. Everybody's had a run-in with Dennis Dykus, so. Okay.
No, clarification, Dennis is working as a consultant for our firm, so I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak on this area.
Mr. Chairman, I would think that if, I think Dennis's, the documents we've got here are very comprehensive, and I think many of us have probably heard him talk about ethics and talk about issues of problems with different businesses and CPAs around the state. I think we all have probably a great deal of appreciation for Dennis and the work that he does, and so I would recommend this for approval.
I like the print, so
You can read it.
I can read it.
That's right.
So is that a second?
That is a second.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Thank you.
Chairman, let me. I just want to say one thing. I'm not sure that I really feel like that we're going in the right direction, approving people for or let's say expanding the number of people out there that can provide ethics courses. I know what we're doing as far as having our board, the two investigators on the board that teach ethics classes, and they teach those for free. And then we turn around and approve people to teach ethics classes that are going to be compensated for that service. But there's been several proposals made to the state board about the possibility of providing these courses online. And I really think that would be a better service to our members to simplify the process of this particular course and provide it online, a very simple process, a very inexpensive way of dealing with it for our members. And I think it'd be a lot better way of handling it than keep approving more and more people to go out there and sell their services teaching this course, although most of them do a very good job of it.
Are we going to hear an update tomorrow about providing?
The update was in my executive director's report, but I'll be glad to speak to it if necessary.
We're going to talk about it at the board meeting tomorrow, potentially, about an update on where we are technically and being able to provide those online courses. Moving in that direction.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Our next item was a request for CPE for attendance at, and help me, is it GASB board meetings? I don't know how to, GASB board meetings. Jan Silvis has requested, let me get to that. A letter, in June 18th, 2013, letter from Jan Silvis talking about her board membership in the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and the time and the effort that she puts and the work she puts into that. And I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think on our rules we have to look at page 61 and 62, which, is that right? When I was looking at this, I was looking at qualifying programs to see what kind of programs we allow people to get credit for it. It talks about, when you teach a course, when you can get CPE credit, and when you write articles and things like that. It talks about when you
at the very bottom of page 61, where it says technical sessions at meetings of the AICPA, NASBA, and state accounting societies and their chapters. I think if we can approve NASBA and the AICPA, we could certainly approve GASB, because I believe their work is a lot more technical in nature than what you're going to get at NASBA or the AICPA.
I would agree with that. I think the question I have is, how do you quantify the technical amount of time that's spent at those meetings, which I assume that, obviously if they're in a board meeting, they're discussing different rule changes. So, is it going to create a administrative nightmare to be able to quantify that? Or do you just grant the full board meeting as CPE credit?
I would think you'd grant the full board meeting as CPE credit.
I would assume the whole meeting is pretty well technical in nature, so.
Clearly, she does a lot of work getting ready for the board meetings that we're not going to recognize. So I think that we're definitely going to be able to, if you decide to do this, to give her appropriate credit.
My question was, and I think what she's doing, she's spending a lot of time and she's actually applying it and working versus just attending a session where she's listening. But I was concerned just because you don't have any wiggle room language in that section that you're citing? I mean, it says, I defer to Chris, you know, I'd like to be able to give her the credit. Just wanted to make sure that we have the legal authority to do so under the...
It's a technical sessions, right, Mark?
Yes, it does say technical sessions.
I mean, I would interpret that, I'm not an attorney, but I would interpret that as the board meetings are technical sessions, because that's where they're deliberating their language, law, rule changes at that time.
I was just concerned because it just said specifically AI, CPA, NASBA, and state accounting societies and their chapters. I mean, it's really...
Does FASB, we don't grant FASB committee service CP for that?
Or had somebody ask for it.
Mark, if a member is member of our CPA, Tennessee CPA, is a member of an AICPA committee, whatever that committee might be, accounting, auditing, tax committee, are they given credit for the time they spend in those committee meetings?
Well, since it says for technical sessions of the AICPA and they want to claim that, then yes, Henry would give that to them.
They've got a number of committees that deal with issues of tax, so they would get credit. They would get CPE credit if they're considering issues of tax.
Yes.
Okay, let me mention this. The Internal Revenue Service has got. They ask people to volunteer to serve on some committees that they have to consider issues of, particularly administrative issues in tax. Internal Revenue Service is not identified here. I would think that we might want to give some consideration to that, because I haven't served on those committees, but I have applied and have talked with a number of people about them. I understand that they're very, very technical and they take up an awful lot of an individual's time.
Good point. We've not had anyone claim credit for that yet.
Haven't got my report, have you? No, I'm just kidding. But I think the Internal Revenue Service ought to be included as one of these organizations.
Maybe this needs a rule change.
I'm kind of leaning that way. I mean, I didn't hear correctly. It says technical sessions, but then it specifies the actual organizations for which attendance must be made. I don't know that we have the authority, actually, after rereading that, to, based on the law, how it's written here, to grant authority to do that. I mean, I think it's a very reasonable request, and I would support it if we could. I just don't know that we can.
I don't know if Chris, if you know if there's any other way we could make this happen.
Well, I'm actually kind of trying to break this rule down into its component parts here. Even though it's the last section listed, sub 3, it just says, subject to compliance with paragraphs 1 and 2 of this rule, these are deemed to be qualifying programs. So I think that particular subsection just says that on their face, if these things fall under those categories, then that's acceptable. And going back up to the very top, you've got sub 1, program of learning contributing directly to professional competency licensee, and meet the statement on standards for CPE programs jointly approved by NASBA and AICPA. I have no idea if what you guys are talking about does that. If GASB, is that?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if GASB meets those statements, but presuming that it does, I think you then go down to number 2, programs requiring attendance may be considered for credit if, and you've got that A through D there. So I think if you read it that way, then you're looking at number 3, and if the GASB thing doesn't fall within the clearly delineated set of things that are deemed to be qualifying on their face, then you have to go to back up to 1 and 2 and do an analysis under those sections. And if you say, my take is that if you say the GASB thing meets 1B, and then whoever's requesting the credit can produce the things set forth in sub 2, A through D, then I think you're good to go. But I think the question of whether we can make it happen under current law is whether it meets 1A and B. And if the committee and the full board say that it does, and then you go to home. But
Yes, my thinking is I feel like we're reaching pretty hard. I mean, again, I'll clarify. I think we should grant this, but I think we need to make sure we have the rules written properly to grant this. And I don't know how lengthy of time it would take to get the rule changed to where it includes AICPA, NASBA, GASB, FASB, and maybe even it'd be nice to have other organization as approved by the board.
I think you put or other similar organizations approved by the board, that language which appears, and that opens it up to.
I mean, it's a very reasonable request. I mean, I would argue that GASB it's probably one of the more technical board meetings that are out there.
If you would look at the bottom of page 62, number 9, where it says, in order to ensure credit, any program of continuing education not specifically covered by this rule must be submitted to the board for evaluation before attendance and or completion. That indicates to me that you have the authority to grant the CPE credits for anything that's not specifically listed here.
That'd be for future attendance. So how would a board member do this? Would they have to just make one submission while they're on the board, or each meeting would they have to request it to be granted?
I like 10. Look at 10. Don't fall into that program of continuing education because I don't think GASB's a pro.
In your opinion, could we grant this after the fact?
Well,
It's a second question. I would be inclined to grant that, but the next question would be, how many hours do you grant?
I mean, she laid out it was 167.
is she looking for going forward because she gives the 2013-2014 calendar year, so. Is she asking for past or is she asking for going forward?
He's asking for going forward.
Okay.
Mark, I haven't looked at this, but what is this individual going to?
She's on the board, so she will be helping to set standards for governmental accounting.
Well, do you think, and this is under sub 5, allowed for service as an instructor, discussion leader, or speaker at any program for which participants are eligible to receive continuing education? Try to maybe get this in somehow. I mean, it's at least arguable that someone who is on the board could fall under instructor, discussion leader, or speaker because they're definitely going to be talking. Now, how much the board wants to grant within that section, I think is completely up to the committee and the full board if they want to go that way, but just bringing it to the committee's attention.
Yeah, please.
Something just to consider. So state societies and the AICPA are listed there currently, as well as NASBA. Those three organizations are used to providing CPE. So we go through a process every time we approve CPE. So let's say I have a tax committee that's meeting with the IRS, and that's a technical session. We still go through the process of registering everybody, they sign in, we issue a certificate. So I think something to think about would be, does GASB do that? So if you approve this, or is somebody there going to go through that process that you So the statements on standards call for continuing education and submit a certificate to this person, or are there instances in which that's not allowed or that's not required? Are you following what I'm saying?
I'm following what you're saying. I think there are instances in which that is not required.
Okay. I just thought that might be something to consider rather than approving it today and then she just submits it on a written note. I didn't know how she would actually submit.
You'd have to submit the agenda from the board meeting.
Okay, so you do on those on a case-by-case basis. Okay.
I want to make sure I understand. Stephen, you were talking about how many hours would be approved, and y'all said for the board meeting. What hours are we talking about? I mean, she's not going to get her full 80 through serving as a board member on GASB. Is that correct?
I think she potentially could, Jennifer.
And I throw this out to you guys in the profession. I mean, is that of concern? Is it of concern? Should it, if we were to approve this, should there be a cap? You know, so that there's some
Something outside of GASB?
out of attending these board member meetings and dealing with the rules. Because on some of these rules there are, like for being an instructor, you can only, you know, they're capped at 50%, things like that, so.
Jennifer, if I may, I think your authority to limit it, if you want to do so, comes right from the number 10 you just cited. The board specifically reserves the right to approve or disapprove credit for all continuing education. And one way to consider what that cap might be is to look back at the sections we just looked at in law and rules, talking about how much CPE you've got to have over the 2-year period. Look to those sections and say, okay, well, how much do you have to have for the individual things? And I don't know the number off the top of my head, but let's just say it were, 40 hours over 2 years for a test accounting, whatever that is. Then if you say we want you to have those 40 plus the 2, then you limit it to whatever's left over for the 80. I mean, it's a thought. Or say, okay, well, we want to give her some potential for maybe carry over to the next year. If it's going to be a lot that's being not allowed, then you look to the carry forward, which I think allows, 24 hours of credit to be carried forward one period? Or is that right? So those are just thoughts on how you might come to some sort of number that you might want to allow if you're going to allow it.
Can I say something real quick? I mean, I'm just thinking, too, she's getting it in a test function, right? I mean, it's kind of like the caps that we put on people, it seems like, or people are providing, like a test services, for example. We don't let them go get all tax hours. And then we mandate what their attest hours are. And where she is focusing is probably a primary area of her practice. And therefore, it's all in a test. It's all yellow book. It's all. Yeah. I mean, she's doing. I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense, but she is in the areas of expertise for which the limitations that we seem to have. We don't limit the number of. I'm trying to say this the right way, but she's not going out and getting tax hours when she's practicing attest functions. She's doing all 100% attest work or attest hours. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, she's educating herself in her own specific area of expertise.
Right. And she's within the guidelines, I feel like, of what we mandate from our requirements. Am I saying that correctly? I'm kind of not making a lot of sense, but.
Ms. Silvas actually works for the Department of Finance Administration with the state, so she is a state employee. I want to clarify that point.
I don't think that doesn't really concern me as well. I mean, I know a little bit about what these meetings are like, and if she has a concentration in governmental accounting, I mean that's a very specific area, and that's very appropriate for her educational requirements. So I mean, I don't know that I would have a problem. I mean, really, she's over-educating herself based on 160 some odd hours that she spends reading and deliberating the rules.
Studying what she's already passing as part of the rules.
That's right. I guess I go back to my other question. How do you, does it have to have approval every time, or do you just grant when you service on the board, you've got a, open clause to get CPE credit? Is that what we do for TSCPA and NASBA service?
Theirs are a little bit different, but I think for this one you could say from the board, service on GASB itself will constitute CPE up to 40 hours per renewal cycle or something along those lines. I believe you're well within your rights to do that.
Based on the law as it's written now, do you think we have the authority to do that?
I do, Mr. Whitaker.
I think you probably have the authority, but with a potential rule change, it'd probably be a little clearer to provide guidance for people going forward. I think it's good that this requester has complied with sub 9 about requesting in advance, and didn't go do all this stuff, and now has come and asked the board to make an exception after the fact in contravention of pretty clear rule language. So there's that. But it's just the only concern there is once you start digging into who gets what credit and caps for how much, there just seems to be a lot of potential out there for different organizations, and leaving somebody out, or an inartfully drafted catch-all, or left the gate too wide open one way or the other. So I mean, that's something to consider in the context of a rule change, but where you are right now, it's probably just as likely as not, if not more so, that you have the legal authority if you're inclined to do that. I'd also say you're just as able to deny it under sub 10 if you so choose, because it doesn't meet the strict requirements of the first part. So all that to say, it really depends on what the committee and the board wants to do.
So I guess my opinion would be I would be inclined to approve this request. I'd also think we need to send a request to the Law and Rules Committee to amend section, what's the line? Is it
202-05-.04
section B?
3B.
3B. To include something like an or other related other technical committees or something like that.
Or other similar organizations approved by the board.
Yeah. Board meeting participation at other such organizations. I'll let you guys figure that out, but I would feel a lot more comfortable if it had a little more specific language in there for that. So I think I just made two motions. I guess I'll start back with the first unless somebody has more discussion. But my motion would be, first motion would be to approve this single instance that Jen Silvis has presented to us. I don't know if we need to put a time limit on or what, but I mean, if we change the law, she's going to be in compliance anyway. She's made a formal request. In my opinion, it falls under Section 10 that we talked about earlier.
You want to get a second on that, and then I want to amend
my motion clean enough?
I want to amend it for just a...
Okay, so we have a motion.
I'd like to ask that you amend it by limiting her CPE credit to 40 hours a year.
Do you mean 40 hours a year or 40 hours per renewal cycle?
40 hours per year. Aren't there 2 years in a renewal cycle?
Yes.
Okay, 40 hours. You have to have 40 hours credit each year.
Right.
So I don't want her to go over I don't want her to claim 60 or 90 hours or 160 hours.
You want to keep her strictly to the 80 hours that you have to renew.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Question, do we limit service on other boards by the same way? Because, I mean, if if we just request that we add other boards on there, it's going to fall under the same rules as that. So, I mean, I don't want to create a specific limitation on this one approval, and then once we change the law, assuming we do, then it opens it back up. You see my point?
I don't know of any other boards we limited on.
So you're saying we do not limit it for other boards?
I don't see why the committee and the board couldn't just do what it's doing now. I mean, this is seems to be sort of an issue of first impression, but it's considering it on a case-by-case basis, and you could do that going forward until and unless there seems to be some urgent imperative to make a change that specifically quantifies limits or caps for specific agencies or standard bodies.
Wouldn't we basically be granting this situation, and it would, if we have a subsequent rule change that would affect it, this would be grandfathered in as long as she's on this GASB board. And then if she got off this board and went into another, then she'd fall under whatever subsequent rule change would cover the situation. Is that, would that be an interpretation on how we would apply this? I don't mean to give a legal interpretation, but is that kind of how it would play out?
Generally speaking, I think you're right. Whatever requests and or conduct, for lack of a better word, come about, whenever they come about, are subject to the law and rules in place at the time. But if there is a law and rule change, even if an identical request or conduct comes down the pike, it could very well be interpreted differently if there's been an intervening rule change since it happened. So I hope that clarifies what you were trying to say, maybe.
I was just trying to say she could still continue to fall under the approval we're giving her today, as long as she's serving on this. Circumstances change, then she would fall under whatever law was at the time, whatever approval she had to seek from this board.
I guess my question is, if we're putting a 40-hour limitation on this specific request, we really remove it when we just add or other boards to that other section. It's almost like we're making hers more restrictive than the new rule, than the law that we would change to. I don't want to do that. I mean, I want to, just because we grant her permission now, I don't want to restrict her later.
I'll withdraw my request motion.
I was going to say, why does it matter to really limit it? I mean, if she's doing the work and she's getting the hours, then if it is 160 hours, I mean, she's still in compliance. She knows more than I do. I don't see any reason to limit the hours unless part of the time of being on there is not really related to the function of rules. I mean, that would be the only reason I would see to limit the hours. But that's entirely
Mark,
up to
is
y'all.
there an agenda or something in there already, or is that coming down the pike? Or
She's giving us a breakdown and agenda per se in here. Certainly provide those if we need them.
my point was going to be the number of hours we're talking about now could be potentially lower depending on what the actual board service over however long this is looks like. So, she's asking in advance, which is the thing to do. The committee and or the board could grant approval for the request subject to verification of the actual number of hours performed, which would be provided by her to us once the meeting is concluded. Is that?
Yes, so it'd be hours of a technical nature, because I noticed there's an administrative section in the agenda that I probably would not feel comfortable giving credit for when they're talking about administrative things, but the technical things, which I assume is the majority of the meeting, I think I would just leave it up to her to submit to you guys some, a layout of the hours she's requesting each for each meeting. Is that a reasonable request?
I think that would be a reasonable request.
All right, well, I'll amend my motion. Let me see if I can try to clean this up a little bit. First motion will be to grant approval of this specific request and require that Ms. Sylvan submit to the board or the directors, the executive director, a summary of the hours requested, and only give credit for those of a technical nature. Clean enough.
Are you continuing your second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. And then you have your second motion?
I guess my second one, before we decide, I got a little confused there. Would it be better for us to include that or other boards in there just to kind of clean up the language and give us definitive authority to do what we're doing?
Do you want to move to, I'm not telling you how to move, but send it to the Law and Rules Committee to look at this and decide if
Do I need a motion for that?
Do we need a motion for that, Mark, or can we just?
Not necessarily. We'll take it to the Law and Rules Committee. You've got the chairman sitting right next to you, so.
I'll talk about it.
Sorry to add to your work.
Fix our problem.
Okay, great.
Do you want to go down and get them with the thunder?
We have a couple more agenda items.
The key is there at the desk.
Number 4, the request from CFA Society of East Tennessee. They're wanting to be a sponsor, I believe, of, let's see. They want to be exempt from the requirement to register with NASBA as a CPE sponsor. It's page 63 of your rule book. It's under paren 3. The rule says the following are exempt from registering with either the NASBA, National Registry, or Tennessee roster of CPE sponsors. And then it goes on to paren A, professional accounting organizations, e.g., AICPA, Tennessee Society of Certified Public Accountants, TSCPA, Tennessee Association of Accountants, TAA, Institute of Management Accountants, IMA, or other similar organizations approved by the board. And if you look on the back page of behind the outline for the state-specific course, there's a list. I asked Karen to give us a list of exempt organizations that have been approved by other committees in the past. We think this is pretty up to date. Just to let you know, I know from my service on this committee, there have been various discussions. There have been times when committees have taken a more limiting approach and stuck more closely to read this, broadly, or open it up to let more organizations be exempt. So committees have taken different approaches. We'll point out in the letter, it talks about how this is local investment professionals. They work, about the public's understanding of the CFA designation and investment industry. It's an exchange of information and opinions among people within the local investment community and beyond. Most of the members are chartered financial analysts. They do have several when I was looking at this originally without the benefit of this list, I was reading it to say professional accounting organizations, and my initial gut was this isn't a professional accounting organization. It's clearly investment people, and obviously their programs are dealing with those concerned with the investment community. I know there could be some overlap with accounting, but what are they really offering when they're offering their programs that deal specifically with accounting? But I do note that in the past, it looks like the CFA Society of Chattanooga Financial Analyst, maybe? Yeah, it says financial analyst in parentheses, was approved.
Financial groups on this list also. I mean, I know investments, financial, they're similar, I guess, but I do financial groups that are already exempt.
I guess I just want to clarify for me as a non-accountant, when they're exempt from registering to go on the sponsor list, but do they still have to, does that mean they don't have to have their programs reviewed or do they still have to apply to get approval for their programs for CPE credit?
Well, they don't have to apply to get the programs approved for CPE credit. That's what they're trying to do. They have to do the rest of the stuff. They have to have keep all the information, provide the certificate of completion.
But we don't know, basically, when they're giving the certificate of completion, we don't know how much of it pertains to actual accounting that we're going to give CPE credit for.
Well, they're going to detail what, whether it's A&A hours or tax hours, or in these cases, it's going to be management advisory or other, more than likely.
I would think, being consistent with the past, I would have a problem denying this chapter's request when we've already given approval in the past for the same organization, just a different chapter. With that, I would move that we recommend to the board acceptance of this organization as an exempt organization for their consideration.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, our next item is request for CPE credit for Graduate School of Banking program. There's a letter. I think we received 2 letters from the Graduate School of Banking about a James M. Walden. A Graduate School of Banking on the campus of Louisiana State University. On one of the letters, it talks about the work that is done is equivalent to the academic work in economics, finance, management, banking law, and marketing at the university level.
So is this a specific request for this individual, or is that
Walden included these 2 letters in his response to his CPE audit. That this was covered under university or college courses.
And that rule, I think, is it's 20-05-.04 3C, which is on page 62. He's wanting to get the university or college courses, provided that where you could get each semester hour credit up to 15
on-credit courses.
Okay. So for non-credit courses, it's continuing education credit shall equal actual time in class. And this is that language we were dealing with in the Law and Rules Committee. Well, you're under subsection 3 that says you have to comply with paragraphs 1 and 2 of the rule. And paragraph 1 talks about have to be a program of learning which contributes directly to the professional competence of the licensee.
Section is that again? I can reread.
Which section that I just read?
Yeah.
It's up in the same rule on page 63, number 1. Oh, sorry, yeah. 1A. It's on 61, sorry. Back.
Saying is that this school has not registered with NASMA.
I think the CPA is trying to get the hours for the classes that he attended to count for a CPE requirement, and he went to banking school, grad school program, and he wants us to count all or a portion of his 80 hours. Clearly, it says we allow some credit for university or college courses, even for non-credit short courses. And it looks to me like the overarching requirement is that they've got to be programs of learning which contribute directly to the professional competence of the licensee. They have to meet the statements on standards for continuing professional education programs jointly approved by NASBA and AICPA. I don't know what that is.
What if the licensee was, just as an example, was an insurance professional, as an example, and they went and took an insurance course like that? Will we grant credit for that because it is improving their professional competence in their area, but it's not really accounting related?
That's something we would probably bring to the board, Stephen.
That's the concern I have. Is the rules pretty open as far as, even go farther. If you had a CPA that worked as an electrician, for example, and they took some electrical courses, that course is adding to their professional competence of their area of quote-unquote expertise. I guess my thing is I don't want to open the door up for all these outside CPE hours that don't really improve the competence, the accounting competence. I guess that's the way I interpret CPE is it needs to improve your education as a accounting professional or a tax professional related to to the license rather than their area of expertise.
Probably the intent of this rule.
And again, I'm not an attorney. I just see that as pretty. Seems like you could argue that you'd have a hard time keeping that case, holding that, winning that argument, I guess.
Yes, for me, when I look at that, in my mind, what category of CPE would it fit? If we have our standards of audit and what fits audit and tax, what would be tax? What would a banking, in my mind, if I'm looking at, is it a CPE? Where would it fit?
It would be other.
Other.
Just other.
Yeah.
I see that. That's. Yeah.
And that's my point. We just throw everything. If we throw everything in other, where do we draw the line as far as investment training is okay, or insurance training, or where do we stop and say no, that really doesn't qualify as other?
I'm not real comfortable with it, just because there's a lot of classes, a lot of schools, and a lot of. I mean, it's not to say that it's not good.
I think we would probably, in my opinion, need more detailed as far as what courses this person took. You know, if there's an accounting related class in there, I wouldn't have a problem granting that course. But if there's a course on customer service at banking, for example, I don't know how that would qualify as a banking. I mean, I'm sorry, as accounting CPE. Or there's a interpersonal communication class in there. I don't think that I would not want to cover that as well. I give credit for that. But if it's accounting or tax for banking or something related to that, I think that would be. I would not have a problem with that. I have a problem with giving a blanket approval for all hours attended without knowing what classes were taken. Does the request have to be granted in advance, or? Are we taking this under Section 10, or Section 10 saying that we have the right to approve or disapprove?
Yes, the licensee is supposed to request permission before attending anything that's not specifically approved. But his understanding was it was a non-credit short course at a university.
How many hours short was it, do you know?
How
do we know? It was 7 hours short for the reporting, or 47 hours short for the reporting period. I guess my recommendation would be is have him submit back a course detail to see what courses were taken, and then we could break it out that way based on what the topics were covered in those classes. Is that a reasonable request? I think I would request we table this and request more information as far as what courses make up the however many hours, 47 hours, and you go from there. Or do we even need a motion? Do we need a motion to take?
Because it's going to potentially affect someone's license rights, I would say yes.
Okay.
So the motion to go back and ask for course detail for the 47 hours of CPE credit that he needs. I'll second the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Our last item is the request from Jennifer Sabels, if I'm saying that right, for an extension of time to complete the education requirement. I believe this is the one we got, it's the email from Alan Cantrell about an error that was made. Like they added up her accounting hours incorrectly. Didn't have there was a rule change, and they told her she was fine under the new rule, and she didn't have the time to ask to fall under the old rule. So they're asking that we give her a waiver to give her time to get her additional. It's the educational requirement. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's the 200 hours. She shouldn't have her educational requirement to sit for the CPA exam.
They allowed her to sit, but she didn't have the educational requirement met. They added her hours incorrectly. They're asking for an extension of 200 days between the time that you complete the exam, get your exam grades, and the time that you complete your education. we're asking for a waiver of that extension.
We have the authority to do that under TCA 62-1-106C. It's on page 8 of the rule book. It says, upon written request of an applicant and for good cause, as determined by the board in its discretion, we can extend the period for completion of the educational requirements at 200-day completion. Basically, we'd be giving her 6 months to go back and get the additional hours that she needs.
I would move that we recommend approval of this to the board based on the fact that it was a mistake made by NASBA in calculating it, and if she had been notified correctly, as this email says, that she would have had enough time to correct the problem. So with that said, I would move that we recommend to the board acceptance of this request of a 6-month request.
Yes.
6-month extension of the educational requirement.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And that completes and concludes the licensing committee. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Well, you all have had an opportunity to review the financial information. I'll entertain any questions you may have. I would like to point out that I'm anticipating that we'll have close to $100,000 that will move from our net revenue to our reserves at the end of the year. The 3 line items I'd point out to you are the printing, duplicating, the communications and shipping, and the third-party professional and administrative services. We're a little bit out of whack on those, but if you add the 3 of them together, we've actually spent $78,576, and our budget for that was $75,587. Considering that we printed new law and rule books, that's not bad. We're doing well in those areas. As usual, the one thing that we're not sure about are the year-end cost backs. We've projected $240,000 as of the end of June. I just have no idea what those are going to be. That is based on last year's.
Mark, I had a couple of questions here on salaries. In the, if I'm reading this right, in the leftmost column, we've incurred $379,557 year to date, and I would assume that's through May. And we've got a projected number through June that is less than that, and I wondered how that could be.
I'm sorry, Casey, that's a mistake on my part. That should be, the $375,920 should be higher, and I'll correct that before tomorrow. That will decrease our projected reserve balance.
Okay, the second question that I have, and I know we've talked about this before, and I think I know the reason, but travel, we had budgeted at $90,000, and we are projecting that at $50,000. And could you comment or elaborate on that? I think it's because some of the meetings we decided not to approve or attend during the year.
Back to the travel plan, the travel budget, I budgeted for 3 board members and myself going to the meetings, and that just never happened. We never had 3 board members that attended. So it was a matter of the travel not being used.
What have we done with that? Remind me, for the budget for next year. We did take that into consideration, I believe, at our discussion of the budget.
I don't have the travel plan with me. I want to say that I reduced that to either 2 or 3 board members, to 2 or 3 total going to these meetings instead of 4 or 5.
Well, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the details of that number, as I remember, when we were discussing the budget. So, okay.
And of course, the travel plan for next year does not include the trip to Hawaii for the NASBA annual meeting in October.
Thank you.
Bill, you got anything?
Well, we've spent $36,000 so far, but still projected for 50. It looks like the 50 projection is a little bit high.
There's some travel expenses that were incurred in June that should bump that number up close to that, Bill, I'd say.
Okay.
You got anything else, Bill?
No, I do not.
Okay. Move on, I guess, to the permission for the administrative law judge to hear CPE and PPT cases.
This is coming up again because we had an ALJ who specifically requested that we have something in the board minutes giving the administrative law judge permission to hear professional privilege tax and CPE cases without the board being present. The board voted on this several years ago, and we found that in the minutes for him. I'd just like something a little bit more contemporary should it come up again. If I remember correctly, in the previous cases, the board voted not to allow revocation before administrative law judge. The board itself wanted to sit in on those hearings should revocation be the final judgment. So we do have that particular reservation made in the past. Not saying that you have to make that in the future.
Commentary?
I'm just asking, you're asking maybe this committee, and then we will recommend to the board that we do a new resolution and make it part of the minutes, Mark? Is that?
Yes.
Is somebody going to draft that resolution for us before tomorrow?
Well, if you'd like for a draft, Casey, we can certainly do that for you. It's simply a statement that you're going to allow an ALJ to hear professional privilege tax and CPE cases without the board being present.
With the reservation that you just...
With the reservation that revocation would not be an option.
I think that's appropriate. Okay. Bill, you got any issues with that?
No, I agree with that.
Okay. Our work here is done. Is that right?
That was it. That's all I had.
Okay.
It's very efficient meeting, Trey.
Yeah, I try. I said you run an efficient meeting.
Do you want to make a motion to adjourn, or do you want me to do it, Bill?
It'll be a post vote.
He's got a beer to crack open, right?
I'll make the motion then.
All right. So moved. Thanks, Bill.
Okay. And the probable cause is at 3:15?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Mark, just a question. Did they...
Call to order the Probable Cause Committee of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy, July the 18th, 2013. It's 3:21 record. Let the record show also that Gabe Roberts is attending via telephone, and Mr. Blofus, Bill Blofus, is supposed to be calling back in. He was on the phone a little earlier. Mr. Whitaker, thank you very much for sending preliminary reports out to us. There's been some added. Mr. Roberts and Mr. Blofus have the updated ones via phone.
I got the one that Mrs. Condon sent around a couple of days ago. I don't think I've got an updated one.
There are actually 17 cases. She's going to send it right now.
Okay.
For the recommendations, but and the order of the numbers will not necessarily correspond to yours because they're, I think, are they in case order, Chris?
I'm sorry, you mean chronologically by?
Well, by filing order, yeah, case.
They are for the most part, but there are a couple in there that may not be going exactly in order, but
I guess they'll have the updated ones here in a second anyway. So, but number 7 that we had the other day is now number 15, I think.
Okay.
I believe it's that one. While they're getting that report to you, Mr. Mills, would you go ahead and why don't you go ahead and give us the status of the open complaints? Tell us where we are in and that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You got my memo and status report for this quarter as well as comparatives year to date. Not a lot of change except that we do have less cases outstanding than I would believe any time in the past 2 to 3 years. Breakdown. We have really had a big drop in legal. That's because these cases have been closed. We don't have a lot of cases in investigation. Hopefully something will come along to keep us busy. Everything else is pretty much the same. If you have any questions about a particular category, I'd be happy to answer it.
Dave, do you have any questions, or did you get that report?
I do not have any questions, and I just got the updated legal report.
Very good, sir. Thank you. Hearing none, thank you for your report. We can look over the cases then and the reports that are attached here. You've got the updated ones. The first 6, anyway, you had before Gabe, and we've had a minute here to read part of them. If you just, Chris, would you like to present each case and go through, or what would be your preference in this today? A lot of them are housekeeping cases, the Texas cases and that sort of thing, but
Mr. Royston, I'll kind of break them down by category of what they are, and then the committee can vote on them however the committee wishes to vote. One thing to note before we get started, I believe what would be hopefully number 16 on the reports that you have in front of you. Mr. Eldridge will have to recuse himself from the consideration of and voting on this matter, which means that if Mr. Blofus hasn't called in by the time the committee gets around to voting on that, then that particular item, because there would not be a quorum for it, the committee would just have to vote with no recommendation to send it to the full board to consider the recommendation that's there. Does that make sense?
That's fine, sir.
Okay.
Refresh my memory. Maybe I'm getting old and I can't remember, but why do I recuse myself?
According to the file, you have some personal knowledge of either the situation and or the respondent.
You're telling me to recuse is what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I needed to know.
Okay. Items number 1 through, looks like numbers 1 through 5 are will be recommendations for disciplinary action of one kind or another, starting with number 6 all the way through like number 11 on my report, but could be number. Mr. Royston, there was one additional item added at the very last minute, even after these, so I'm working on that one that I updated. So if we're one off on the numbers,
okay,
please forgive me. I believe it's through possibly number 11 on my report, number 10 on yours for letters of warning. Number 12 on mine, number 11 on yours would be for a binding letter of instruction with the conditions that are set forth. Numbers 13 through 18 on my report and possibly 12 through 17 on yours will be recommendations for dismissal, some with prejudice, meaning that the cases will not be brought back up if approved, and some without prejudice in the event that the respondent is ultimately located and or wishes to reapply or reinstate their license at some future date because we can't find them now. So that's the substance of the report, and so I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Royston.
Okay, we have 17 on what we have in front of us.
And there will be 18 on the report, and when we get to the sections with the letter of warning, what I would propose is to read in the missing item, just read it out loud, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, then. Okay, each of you should have had a time at this moment to read case number 1 Are there any recommendations or questions regarding that case? Or the $5,000 proposed civil penalty? Okay, what about number 2? Timely paying the professional privilege taxes. Offering a consent order. Okay. What about number 3? Offering consent orders. Okay, number 4. Questions from, we all agree with those? Very good. About 5. Consent order and the payment of $500 civil penalty. We can vote on those first 5 since they're a separate set. I'd entertain a motion to refer to the full board the recommendation of our staff attorney.
Can we go ahead? I mean, the ones with the letter of warning and the binding letter of instruction and the dismissals too, to include all those in there with the exception of 16?
We can do that if we're going to have to read one into the record here in this next category.
Do that one separate too?
Well, I would probably go with what Mr. Royston's proposed, because 1 through 5 are going to be unchanged no matter what. And before the vote on the letter of warning and letter of instruction section, that's when I would like to read
in. Okay.
I have to read that into the record.
I would move that we send a recommendation to the board to accept the recommendations as noted for items 1 through 5.
I would second.
Thank you. That was Gabe Roberts for the record. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 6 is closing with a letter of warning.
Mr. Royston, if I may, I'll go ahead and read that additional item into the record. It will appear tomorrow as number 7, so it'll be plugged in right after number 6, and this will be complaint number L13-ACC-RBS-2013-004171. The complaint alleges that the respondent CPA failed to notify the Tennessee Board of the revocation of his CPA license in Texas for non-renewal. After being contacted by the investigator relative to this complaint, the respondent advised that he was not aware of the requirement that he notify the Tennessee Board of what he referred to as the non-renewal of his Texas license, especially since he also seemed to be unaware that not renewing a Texas CPA license typically results in revocation. The respondent has no prior complaint history, apologizes for any inconvenience, and requests leniency from the board. As such, a letter of warning is recommended, and the recommendation is to close with a letter of warning.
Let the record show case ending in 4171 will be item 7 for the board tomorrow. We have the number 7 that's in our report today, number 8, and the 6 I mentioned a minute ago that are all that through our number 10 will be 11 tomorrow. We're closing with a letter of warning. There's no reason to vote on these separately until we get down to 16, right? Our 16.
No, sir, not necessarily. That what will be number 12 tomorrow, the binding letter of instruction, if you want to take that up separately, it's fine, but if you want to include it in the letter of warning vote, that's also fine.
Okay, our number 11 will be 12 tomorrow. All right, let's
reference the numbers. So we basically got item 6, the new 7, 7 becomes 8, 8 becomes 9,
All the way down.
9,
All the way
10,
down.
9, 10, 11.
Okay, we're not changing any orders beyond that point, so. Okay, if we can go through old 15, new 16. Everybody's had a chance to review them. Most of them have to do with the Texas type situation, non-renewals. I would entertain a motion included in that. It's the one that we have with the letter of instruction. It's a little bit different, penalty phase or discipline, whatever. We can include that in the same motion.
This is Gabe. So moved.
Okay.
Second.
I have a second on that. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. All right, let's take 17 then. We're going to skip 17, 18 tomorrow. Have a recommendation to dismiss the complaint.
On the old item 17,
On
new
the
item
old item,
18.
same new
So
item.
moved.
Right. Do I have a second on that, Mr. Roberts?
Seconded.
All right, thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. 16 in your report today, 17 tomorrow. Mr. Eldridge has recused himself from voting on without having a quorum present. We will take that without recommendation to the full board tomorrow for disposition of that particular one. And we have also on our case, that concludes that part. Are you going to make the report on the proposed docket tomorrow? Today, it's in our packet.
I can certainly do that. Mr. Joseph will probably be here tomorrow to present it, but I will present it to the committee in his stead. Now that this matter has been filed with the Administrative Procedures Division, I can go ahead and read the details because it is a public record. The complaint number is L12-ACC-RBS 2011-032-501. APD docket number 12.19-120253J. The respondent is Tracy Lynn Wright, and the allegation in this matter is that Ms. Wright has held out as a CPA despite not having a valid license to do so, and there was a prior consent order from August of 2007 where Ms. Wright agreed to a payment plan which was only partially complied with, and so the additional complaint again is for holding out as a CPA, both in a voicemail and allegedly by using the designation on her exterior office door sign. After some negotiations with Mr. Joseph, our litigator, Ms. Wright, I believe through her counsel, has submitted what will be an agreed order if approved by the board, which would call for settlement by consent order with total civil penalty and costs of $4,000. And it appears that, according to Mr. Joseph, the check has already been received from her lawyer, so there may not be any issues with payment this time, we hope. The payment will include the full remaining balance of the 2007 consent order, civil penalty of $2,467.68 for the holding out without a valid license, and a $200 reimbursement for the filing costs of the notice of hearing and charges. The respondent did state that she will possibly apply for relicensure at some point in the future. That's not today, and the committee can read the rest of Mr. Joseph's report and try to answer any questions. But I joined Mr. Joseph in his recommendation that this proposed agreed order be accepted, in no small part because of the difficulty of enforcing collection activity against a respondent that doesn't have a valid license against which to proceed in the event that the terms of the order are not complied with, and also assuming the accuracy that the proposed payment has already been made. I think that just strengthens the case, so I would request that the committee recommend to the full board acceptance of Ms. Wright's proposed agreed order.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. We have a recommendation from legal counsel, our assistant general counsel, Mr. Joseph, requesting or recommending approval of this. Do I hear a motion for approval to the for the full board tomorrow?
So moved.
Second. You still with us, Mr. Roberts?
I am. I'm sorry. I thought you seconded. Yes, second.
Okay, thank you. Just counting on you out there.
The microphone buzzed off, and all I heard was seconded.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Is there anything else to come before our committee today that anyone is aware of?
Can I ask a question real quick, Don?
Sure.
Do we have an update on, is this the right committee, on the last meetings? We had that person that came back, and we're going to reinstate their CPA license. Do we have an update on that case at all?
Yes, Mr. Roberts, we do. Mr. Dickens, we did the due diligence and looked for judgments and liens outstanding. There were none that we could find.
Okay.
Mr. Dickens has completed his CPE and submitted his money. He is currently in probationary status.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. See y'all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe.